Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Chocolate Life Live. On today, Friday, July 7th, World Chocolate Day. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host today, and I'm also the creator and the moderator of TheChocolateLife.com. And we've got a really, really interesting, I think, topic for today's live stream. Because it is World Chocolate Day, I wanted to discuss the proposition, is Tony's Chocolonely a force for good in the world? And I posted this on LinkedIn and all my social media accounts, this question, asking people to comment on this idea, either in the negative or in the affirmative, what their thoughts are with respect to their perception of the companies, Tony's Chocolonely, and what they had managed to achieve over the course of the last 15 plus years in the world. And I want to start off, as I will often do, by sharing with people the idea that we have here the homepage of TheChocolateLife.com right here at the moment. So this is the homepage of The Chocolate Life. You can go there right now. For every single one of these live streams that I put together, I work on creating a post, and here is the post. And so for people who might have wondered, this is actually a Tony's Chocolonely bar, which I have stylized. It's a milk chocolate bar. People may recognize this particular thing. Not a puzzle piece per se, but this sort of tessellated pattern, which we're trying to look at it, and I don't think that what is being communicated is clear to us. And so this was a really, really interesting metaphor for me. So what you can do is you can go to this page on thechocolatelife.com right now, and you can follow along. There are a bunch of resources, things that I've published, other things that are done, a file that you can download, and also the inspiration for this format. During lockdown, I had a lot of hours to watch a lot of things, and I had this very, very particular video that I ran across featuring Christopher Hitchens and Stephen Fry on the Intelligence Squared channel. Asking the question, propose the Catholic Church as a force for good in the world. And that was what kicked off my thinking about this. And I would, irrespective of where you stand on the idea of that particular proposition, it's an interesting watch. And I think that you might get a good idea as to why it was the inspiration for what it is that I wanted to do today, which is to discuss, is Tony's Chocolonely a force for good in the world? And I want to start off by welcoming today Ann Riggs. Ann Riggs is the founder of a project called Slave Free Chocolate. Ann, how are you today?
I'm great, and thank you very much for having me on.
It's my pleasure. And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on to start the conversation is that for quite some time, Slave Free Chocolate has maintained a list of what you think to be ethical chocolate makers. And for quite some time, Tony's Chocolonely was on that list. But I think it's 2 years ago now already, you announced that you were removing Tony's Chocolonely from the list. And so I would like to get an understanding of, number one, what the process was that you went through to say, oh, we can no longer have Tony's to be a part of this list, and what some of the pushback was, a positive and negative. So what were the positive comments you got, what some of the pushback you got on the decision to remove Tony's from your list?
Okay, Tony's, to give you just a quick background on the Slave Free Chocolate list, I started Slave Free Chocolate just right about the time the journalists were starting Tony's Chocolonely in the Netherlands, right? Just kind of about the same time when Terry Collingsworth and international rights advocates were starting their legal action, right? So as an activist, and this was before the Bean to Bar movement and everything, as an activist, you are trying to get people to do a call to action. Write their senators, write their public leaders, speak out about it, right? One way as a call to action as an activist is to vote with your dollars. So I started the list so that people had options. If I'm telling people that child slavery and rampant child labor exists in the chocolate industry, and people say, well, what can I do about it on a minor scale? I'm like, well, don't buy ethical chocolate. So back then, there were just a tiny handful of ethical chocolate companies running. This was probably by 2006, 2007. The movie was just getting going, and Tony's had started up, and they were the only company for a long, long, long time that talked publicly about the abject poverty, child labor, child slavery problems in the industry in the two countries in West Africa. So they were on the list just because of that. You know, I knew that Barry Callebaut was making their chocolate for them basically for a long time, but they were great activists speaking out on stuff, which is wonderful. And the other part that is interesting too is, you know, the initiatives they said, like, you know, this is what we're going to do to help combat this problem. I was naive back then too. And I'm like, oh, cool, something's happening, right? Or Nestle would announce an initiative when public pressure got to be enough and be like, yeah, look, if you're going to do something about this problem. But that was 16, 17 years ago. We're looking at this problem now for 24 years. And as everything stands today, everything is worse for these farmers. Nothing that's been announced, nothing has actually changed the dial enough to say that it is a statistically relevant fact that things have gotten better.
Okay, so I think it's important that people do have that historical context because, for example, you mentioned Terry Collingsworth and the International Rights Advocates. They have been in court at one level or another for close to 20 years working on this issue. People don't really understand that Tony's Chocolonely introduced their first chocolate bars 20 years ago next year. Just as a sort of their initial runs of like 5,000, 10,000 bars, and they had done that. But they actually went into quote unquote business in about 15 years ago, I think in 2008. And so there's a lot of stuff which is going on about this time. But and for many years, it appears that Tony was the only company that was shouting out into the void. You know, this is what it is that we are planning to do. Right. But from the very beginning, they're making this representation, right, and not being open about the fact that all of their chocolate is being made for them by Barry Callebaut, arguably one of the largest offenders when it comes to illegal child labor. Well, in the cocoa sector in West Africa. And I think that as a consumer, right, what do I do about that tension, right? So on one hand, you've got this company saying we're going to change the world, but on the other hand, they're saying we are, you know, dependent upon the status quo in order for us to be able to succeed as a business and prosper as a business.
Right. So I think what the consumer needs to do, which is sort of my next step, is we as consumers need to demand in truly ethically independent verification of things that people are saying. Okay? Because without it, and what we have with Tony's, what we have with everybody, is all the fox guarding the hen house. You know, it's like it's constantly that. So I think
what you're saying is we can't trust FLO Fair Trade. We can't trust the Rainforest Alliance.
No, actually, unfortunately, we can't because nothing is verified. Nothing is verified. And I first want to say, so I've been working on this for a long time. There are super exceptional people in the chocolate industry, in the industry of technology, coming up with transparency things. Really great people. There's so many great people working, like I would say, like on the middle of the problem. All right. But the reality is we are not going to solve this problem without a huge, true buy-in from the multinationals that are truly profiting from this. You know, we all know that list, right? We're not going to do that. So anything that somebody says this isn't a millions of dollars problem. This isn't a tens of millions of dollars problem that we've seen from all these initiatives, right? 3 million here, 10 million here. This is honestly a billions of dollars problem. Okay. And so anything that comes up that's not addressing the billions of dollars problem and it's just doing these kind of initiatives, I have 100% deduced that this is just what I call brand washing. You're keeping your market going 100%. And you know, Tony's has done a lot of great things. They have done a lot of great awareness, but at the end of the day, nothing's changed, and they've gotten some great investment and everything. But I don't invest in a private right-owned investment, I think, really, anyway.
Right.
But their investors invested to make money, 100% make money. They didn't invest to like tear down the structure of multinationals.
So before we follow that thread, what I want to do is I want to mention to everybody, go into the comments, whether you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook now, and let us know where in the world that you're connecting from. Or if you have a comment or a question for either myself or for Anne or for any member of the community, hey, you might know the answer to this question. Please put it into the comments. We'll get it up on the screen and we will let everyone know. So first, what I want to do is I want to give a shout out to Samuel Edelowo, who's connecting from Cameroon. It's good to see you back, my friend, and thank you for joining us, spending part of your World Chocolate Day with us today. Lynn Laverack, who you probably know, or Lynn Lockwood, I'm sorry. I've got this. Catherine Laverack, whom you probably know, Anne. So there's all this stuff going on. Do you know both Catherine and Lynn?
Yes.
Anne? Okay.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Yeah. Hi.
Gotcha. We have this. So one of the challenges that I have with a company like Tony's Chocolonely, and perhaps you can talk about this as well, is to some extent, number one, they are a single issue company. Number one is if they actually solve the problem of illegal child labor, their reason for existence goes away.
Right.
So to some extent, they require the problem in order to be able to pursue their business model,
yes.
Which is, this fundamental conflict of interest that they have. And they need to be profitable as a business. And all of those things, both of those things seem to be at odds with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I also want to do a real quick thing is to give a quick shout out to a LinkedIn user who's may or may not be logged in, who said, I'd like to know how they got the name in the first place. And the same for
okay. So in the first place.
Right. Yeah. So do you know the answer to that question? I have a partial answer. I actually do know the answer. I have a partial answer.
It runs that list. I do. I put people on the list. I take people off the list, right?
Yep.
When I first started that list, there were only a handful of bean to bar companies. Okay. Right. There were only a handful of ethical companies. I put people on the list. I would kind of talk to them, kind of sneaky, like, where do you get your beans about? Because when I started that list, anybody mentioning child labor, child slavery, abject poverty, you just ruined chocolate for me. Thank you very much. I was a pariah as an activist in the chocolate industry themselves because nobody was talking about this publicly, right? Tony started talking about this publicly. Hallelujah. Terry Collingsworth is actually doing something about it. Hallelujah. Right. So I think like maybe Montezuma's got on the list and I have to redo that. I have to really look at that one again too. But Green and Blacks was on the list before Mondelez, before Cadbury bought them. I put people on the list and they didn't want to be on the list. They wanted nothing to do with my list because I'm talking about the dark side of chocolate, right? But then as the bean to bar movement grew bigger, and there's really great ethical people who are starting chocolate companies and making beautiful artisanal chocolate that want no part of abject poverty and child labor and child slavery, the tide sort of turned for that list, okay? So people wanted to be on that list because the list was making people money. And so I don't charge for the list, right? It would be too expensive to truly 100% certify something like this, but I've got a project that could maybe work better. So the list isn't all the ethical chocolate companies that exist in the world. I don't have the marketing resources to go out and chase those people. The list who are on the list, I consider to be like a group of activists ourselves. I consider us to be like this whole being. So anybody who attests, saying, I swear that I'm in this business and I'm not partying with Barry Callebaut. I don't get my couverture from Mondelez, right? I do everything soup to nuts ethically. Then I just put them on the list. If I find something else, they're off the list. So that's how the list works. It's not an official certification of any kind. It's a movement.
Right. As you indicated, one of the things that I know is that maintaining any kind of list like this in the world of chocolate is a never-ending, time-consuming prospect, and you need to be in it on a daily basis.
Right. So just so I can do a little plug for the pro bono list that I do, is I don't charge for the list. I don't make any money at Savory Chocolate because if I did, and the problem was solved, then I would have lost my job.
Right.
Right? Okay, I would have just lost my job. And instinctively, as survival humans, we don't want to lose our jobs, right? So I don't charge for this. And if somebody wants to be on the list, just email me and we will have a discussion. It's not necessarily that hard, because I'm not saying I guarantee for, certification. Things can change. We all know that in a dime.
Right. So if you can, so Tony's is on the list. And then did you know from the beginning that Barry Callebaut was making the chocolate for them? And then you discovered that Callebaut was making the chocolate.
No,
and so
I knew sort of from the beginning Barry Callebaut was kind of making their chocolate for them. But they were the only chocolate company that was talking about child labor and child slavery in the industry, right? And they also had some sort of ideas and initiatives, and I think at the beginning they were very earnest. Mm-hmm. But this problem is, as they got down the rabbit hole of this problem, right? Mm-hmm. It's a very convoluted, very hard problem to solve. Mm-hmm. But simply, it's not going to take an initiative over here, an initiative over here, Leslie's thing over there. That's just brand washing, unfortunately.
No, I agree. And I want to do a quick shout out to Catherine, who says that she's in the UK, and pardon me for misunderstanding. Okay. There were extra names in there, and so I got confused in talking about that. So what I want to do really, really quickly, if I can, Anne, is switch the view quickly and then move over to here. For everybody, I posted this question about Tony's on my LinkedIn profile, and got some questions and answers in response to people. The first one of which was from Nick Saxme at Cocoa Runners, who says he's got a lot of opinions about Tony's, but an interesting challenge to settle on one side of a binary proposition. So just for everybody, I said you can take both sides of the proposition, just put them in different comments. Argue for the affirmative in one comment, argue for the negative in another comment, and it's not clear. But Nick's take is it's complicated. Right? He's going to take the position, however, they're not a force for good in the world. My reasoning is that Tony's are offering, at best, an iteration on a fundamentally broken system, right? When what's needed is systemic change. They're positioning themselves as radical disruptors, which I think is disingenuous. They're another player in big chocolate, but their domination in consumer mind space means that they obfuscate and muscle out true disruptors, which I think is a really interesting observation there. What are your thoughts, Anne, on what it is that Nick has?
I've never disagreed with anything that Nick said, and he's so eloquent in his point. I 100% agree.
Right. So, it's just really, really important to go back and to follow up on one of the things that Nick said here. It is worth adding that the reality, as with everything, is nuanced and complicated. And outside of the challenge, he's willing to concede that Tony's has had, or in the British locution, Tony's have had, right, a positive effect in raising an awareness, creating a narrative amongst consumers about social justice in the chocolate supply.
Exactly. And that's why they were on my list for so long, while I was waiting to see if they were going to change Barry Callebaut, which is...
They're never going to do. They represent such a small amount of the business.
Right. Yeah, Barry Callebaut doesn't care. Yeah.
But Nick, I want to say that I agree with you wholeheartedly. But I think there's a nuance and complication there that maybe you haven't considered, and I want to put it there, which is I think that one of the things that people look for in things like the Rainforest Alliance frog or the Fair Trade seal or the chocolate scorecard green egg is they're looking for proxies for decision making. So, I can feel good about doing this because somebody else has done all of the work for me. I don't need to invest any cycles in determining whether or not I should believe what is being told me.
Okay.
Right. And so what happens here, I think, is that to what extent is people going, oh, Tony says they're fixing the problem, so therefore I can become complacent about the problem.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there's this really interesting, I buy into the idea to some extent being a supporter of Tony's becomes part of my personal identity, which is they encourage through what they call their special friends program.
Yeah.
Right. And I can now feel good about myself, but I don't actually have to think about the larger implications of the problem. And we're going to get to what I think a way to decode sort of what some of the language and larger implications of that problem are. So would you agree with that, Anne, that one of the real challenges we face here is that by people buying into the proposition that
Oh, yeah.
Tony's is a force for good, that what happens is that they stop thinking.
Exactly, and I do that with all these other products. Okay, I'm guilty of that myself with whatever it is, laundry detergent or clothes or whatever. So that's as me as just an average consumer. We have that challenge, and what I tell people is, like none of like there are a few cooperatives, just like there are a few good farms and a few great people working around the thing, but it's not enough to turn down the dial on abject poverty, right? And I do tell people though, like, but at least when you're buying a rainforest coffee can, right? That data gets collected to Nestle, whoever is a big daddy of Rainforest Alliance, right? And they do look and they say, these set of consumers are looking for an ethical label, right? Right now, it's just all fox guarding the hen house, and fair trade's a great ideal, and there's some great fair trade cooperatives, but unfortunately, not enough of them are working well in Africa to change the dial. But that data is being collected. That data is being collected, whether it's true or not. We as consumers have to do something.
So to some extent, if I can, so a big company like Nestle is looking at the consumer data to see how consumer sentiment is driving purchase behavior and
Right.
whether or not they need to pay attention to this initiative or not. So if we put this label on our can, it will drive sales by X additional percent, and we're perhaps reaching a consumer we wouldn't otherwise reach.
Right. They're
So
chasing consumer demand and consumer concern about what we put in our bodies and what we eat and everything
yeah,
is fortunately growing. Okay. But the demand,
right,
unfortunately, there's no verified labels on anything. So,
right,
you can, Captain Crunch is a part of a healthy breakfast. If that breakfast also included, I don't know, a piece of fruit and an egg, right? I mean,
right,
there's,
right,
so we have that problem. So they are doing that, but they are looking for that. And if there's some way to prove that people are doing what they're saying they're doing, it's important that we encourage people, it's like me, to say, go buy fair trade coffee, even though I know there's child labor underneath that little frog.
right. So I want to go back to LinkedIn and a comment that Lynn Lockwood put together, which she says she likens Tony's to an abusive relationship, maybe a codependent relationship where manipulation is key. What they're doing is playing on people's kindness and humanity, those that care enough to want to search for something that really does make a difference, right? And yet abusing that confidence that they've developed, right? For me, this is worse than Nestle and Calabat themselves in the sense that they're selling themselves as better in the world when in fact they're just as same as everyone else. They are the narcissists of the chocolate world. So, all right, Anne, what do you think about that?
Oh my God, again, a beautifully executed statement that I 100% agree with. I couldn't have put it better. That was beautiful.
Great. I wanted to make sure that Terry Collingsworth of International Rights Advocates had a chance to respond to this. Terry's been a guest on, I think, 2 or 3 different episodes of the Chocolate Life Live, and I've done posts which follow the legal battles that he's facing here in the United States. And he was in New York City before I left, giving a talk about the new movie. Which Mickey Mastrati put together. And it was fun to be able to have that. I mean, first time meeting him in person, and to be able to have that conversation. So what Terry has says, where to begin, right? The giant flaw in the plan was Tony's decision to partner with Barry Callebaut, right? So what I would say is it was, number one, again, when we talk about force for good, I think there's 2 aspects of it. Tony's as a company, I do not think exists as a viable commercial entity had it gone the bean to bar startup route. They never would have been able to get to the economies of scale necessary from day one in order to get their product out in the world. And it would have probably taken them several years in order to be able to get to consistent quality in order to be able to deliver a product. So the decision to go to Callebaut is, okay, they had to go there. On the other hand, what it did is it exposed them to the notion, right, which this is what they're trying to overcome. They're exposed them to the notion that they are damned by association. Right. So yes, we have made a deal. Some believe is the literal devil. I'm not saying that, but some believe is the literal devil because they have been profiting for quite some time on illegal labor in the cocoa supply chain. So the giant flaw in the plan was the decision, and that flaw it's a double-edged sword. It works in both ways. So we want to understand that Terry and international rights advocates and others have been observing and documenting Calabout's profiting from child slavery and their blatant lying about it to the public for decades. So when Tony's announced they were partnering, it was a shock. It's like starting an environmentally friendly energy company with Chevron as your partner, right? Tony says that they're going to be a force for good to influence Barry Calabout. So the idea Barry Calabout went in there as a very small tail, right? Thinking that what they were going to be able to do was wag a very big dog and get them to change their sourcing policies, right? But after many more than several years, I would argue, Terry, BC has not improved at all, and Tony's is benefiting from BC's economies of scale built on the backs of children. Right. Further, Tony's has refused any numerous requests to personally inspect their supply chain, right? Which should be a red flag for a big company like that. They say that they trust their farmers, so independent monitoring is not necessary. But they do have monitoring. It's just done by Rainforest Alliance or FLO Fair Trade, or it's done by Fair Trade. So there's quote unquote independent monitoring, but it's being done by Fair Trade. But Barry Calabout and Nestle and others, they all have a similar line. If Tony's isn't clean, why not pull back the curtains and let us have a look, right? Tony's does a great job of marketing their claim of being child labor free. That's all. So before we get to that, what I want to do is actually, I posted this on Reddit as well. And so in the r// chocolate subreddit, and somebody made an interesting comment there. So here is the post on Reddit, and somebody said, from what I heard, they were slavery free until they were taken over. That's an interesting observation. And now they're only working towards being slavery free. So, Anne, do you know, my understanding, from my reading of it, is that the language that they have used to describe the mission has changed over the last 5 years.
Yes,
They've gone from more.
They were getting sued for false claims in different courts and everything. So they started.
Were those courts in the EU or the UK? I don't remember anything like that in the US.
I don't remember because they hadn't been. This I think was before they came to the US, right? And so I don't know what they're doing, but I think that I think they were making. I think they sort of got kind of caught off guard because when they were saying, we're the only slavery-free chocolate, which couldn't have been possible for it to be true, they weren't thinking anybody else was going to investigate this, thing. Like there was a consumer movement that was getting, kind of looking at it. And so then there was the mission has changed to become slavery free or whatever, but they've had lots of different claims over the years. And
so the language of their messaging has changed. Yeah. So number one, I think that Tony's Chocolonely as a single issue marketing company has done a brilliant job. Yes. I mean, they are brilliant at what they do. Number one, they picked a hot button issue because it involves children, right? So we pay attention to anything that involves children, in a way. And then what they've done is they've picked. I mean, the design of the bar, apparently it's broken up to represent inequality. That's where the idea for the shape came from. They're using brilliant colors. You can pick it out on a shelf from a mile away. The language is relatively simple, and who doesn't want to feel good about doing good? I mean, it's a brilliant marketing company. They've made a couple of missteps.
Super brilliant. Yeah.
They made a couple of missteps. I think they're 4 bars too far. Was the thing that really tipped me over going, I need to look at this much more closely. But at the same time, right, that marketing obscures, obfuscates is the word that Nick Saxby used, a very, very different reality on the ground.
Absolutely.
Right. And so this is, I think, the challenge that I wanted to make people aware of today. And I'm going to do something that I try to do on a regular basis in terms of showing the marketing materials of these companies and how to go about decoding them. And I don't know if this is something that you've ever done before, but I do want to get there. Before we get to that next point, I want one little quote from Catherine Laverack, who said she was going to post affirmative and negative comments about Tony's because they're raising awareness of the issues and promoting the need to pay more for cacao, but I couldn't bring myself to write the words affirmative and Tony's in the same sentence. Apologies, but I'm sticking with negative. They are absolutely creating awareness of the need to have more ethically traded chocolate, yes, but they are still part of a system that maintains the status quo.
Right, because we pay more for a product. Yeah, they are paying in many cases more for the product, but they're not paying, but nobody's even up to half of what they need. So
Right.
it's just brand washing. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do, and I think that's a really, really good point into where I want to go here, which is that what I have done is I have posted on the Chocolate Life a link to the Tony's 2021 annual report. So this is what they call the FAIR report. Number one, they're calling it the FAIR report. They're using loaded language from the very beginning. This is not their annual report. It's not a transparency report. It's another report. It's your FAIR report. And so off the bat, what they want to do is they want to manipulate your emotions, right? Way. So just to let everybody know. But I've got the link to the Tony Chocolonely website. I've got the link to this particular page. I've also downloaded the annual report as a PDF, and so you can copy the annual report. So there's no reason for anybody to pay attention to what the URLs are or anything like that. All of these links are on the page for the post for the Chocolate Life today. But what they've done, which I think is really admirable, is they've put this chart up as one of the first pages that you will find in the annual report. And what I want to do is I'm going to switch over to another view of this, which is in Adobe Acrobat, so I can do a little search later. Have you ever really gone through and looked at this closely and tried to figure out what the numbers are?
Not this year. I've looked at the other years. I just gave up. I'm like, this is like hours out of my time, and they're not moving the dial. So, like, there's no independent verification. So whatever,
So just for everybody, this is the 2021 annual report, and we're almost halfway through 2023, right? And so we don't have the 21-22 report. So we do not know. So one of the challenges, why does it take so long to generate these reports? That's because they're extremely highly visual, and there's, I believe, a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of visual design, which is there to obfuscate what it is that's going on, to hide deliberately. So let's go look at a couple of really important numbers that jump out right off the top of the head, right off the top of the page. And the first one is knowing that they've been in business for 15 years. So after 15 years of being in business, right? The number of farmers that Tony's has impacted is 8,921 by their own counting. And by the way, this is probably, when we think about this is farming families. So looking at another bit of statistics, on average, the size of a family in cocoa in Ghana is 6 people, in Cote d'Ivoire it's 8, or the other way around. Mm-hmm. So this roughly 9,000 is probably 50,000 people, just overall, just to get it, 50,000 people that have been affected after 15 years. After 15 years,
were we at 800,000 to 900,000 farms, not counting people?
Just in Cote d'Ivoire or Ghana. I mean,
both those countries together, yeah.
Right, and they're talking about 1.5 million children being involved in illegal labor. So number one is, this is a minuscule impact.
Yeah.
In terms of the lives and livelihoods of farmers, mm-hmm. and their families, number one. Mm-hmm. The other thing to notice is that their supply chain is incredibly small. They're working only with 7 cooperatives between Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, right? Now, what does this mean? So we notice over here, right, that they have got 12,574 metric tons of cocoa. And what we can do is we can say this is roughly 1.4 metric tons. I did the math earlier, 1.4 metric tons per farming family. Now, if we look at somewhere between 400 and 600 kilos per hectare in terms of productivity, what we get is an idea of, okay, now we get an idea of about how big the farm size needs to be in order to be able to get to that level of productivity.
Yeah.
And if we also take a look at this, how many kilos per hectare, we can also get an idea about, well, how many hectares of cocoa planting is involved. And so
Right.
this is really, really interesting, good to know, right?
Mm-hmm.
But notice that we have the biggest number on the page is the year 2021 and the number 3, right? So our eye is bouncing around from all of these numbers trying to figure these things out, right? The biggest text on the page says CLMRS, right? And you have to look very, very small type underneath it to understand that this is the child labor monitoring and remediation system, right? So, okay, what does all that mean? We have 9,000 farming families and 12,000 metric tons of cocoa. We've got this 3.79 million something. Is it dollars? Is it euros? Is it pounds? It doesn't say. And depending on the exchange rate, that's significantly different, right? Amount of money. But 3.79 million, you divide that among 9,000 families, it turns out it's about $425 per family per year. You've $35 a month. You divide that among an average family size of
75 cents ish a day.
It's $6 per family member per day is about what the impact is. So what I want you to do is look at these numbers closely. Now, they have 109,526 serious friends. All right, and so serious friends means somebody who's signed up to take some sort of Tony's commitment, or whatever that is. That number is roughly 12 times greater than the number of farming families that they have been helping out. So just go take a look. Also, we'll get to this someplace else, but if we go take a look at this chart over here, right? What you do is you find, oh my gosh, in 2019, 2020, when the farm gate price paid to cocoa farmers in Ghana was roughly $1,500 per metric ton, right? Which is well below the market price at the point. That makes sense because of the way CocoBOD works. CocoBOD's going to take, a large percentage off the top. And so what you do is you find out with all these extra dollars that they get paid $2,100 roughly a metric ton in 2019, 2020. There's another chart, and we'll deconstruct where that number comes from. Right? But when you think about what this means in terms of what the price of cocoa is paid to the farmer and what has to be done, what happens here is you can get a rough idea of being able to connect, this number 12,574 with this number 8,921 with this number to 3.79 million, right? So it says if I paid $2,000 a metric ton for $12,500 or 12,500 metric tons of cocoa, I paid about $25 million for cocoa. That's about how much they paid for cocoa, which for a company that made $100 million is a significant percentage of their income, specific percentage of their revenue. But what I want to do is I want to jump over here very, very quickly, right, and talk about the numbers that are very, very small here. They're here, right, but they're very, very small. So what they're saying here, and you have to look closely, is that of the 8,921 farming families on 7 cooperatives, right? What they did in the reporting period is they found 1,701 new cases of illegal child labor, right? So 275 were found at the longer term cooperatives, and 1,400 were found at the 2 new cooperatives. All right, what it says, we don't know the relative sizes of the cooperatives, if they're about the same size. What it does say is that at cooperatives that have been a part of the process for some time, the incidence of illegal child labor seemed to be lower. We don't have any statistics. We're never going to get any statistics, but that's an imputation that we can make from this, right? So the labor rate of illegal child labor is nearly 4% at the 5 long-term co-ops and 50% at the 2 new co-ops. Again, an indication that people who are involved in this over the longer period of time, right, do have this reduction in illegal child labor. The challenge is this because of Tony's, or is this because they're part of the fair trade operation? Because this is a part of what fair trade is all about, right? So is it directly attributable to what it is that Tony's is doing, right? Or is it directly attributable to something else?
I don't believe it. I mean, I don't know. None of those statistics that they're ponying up are really actually verified anyway, right? So, well, some of them, the Department of Labor comes out, they'll have some good numbers. So, but you know, the problem is like unless you are okay, at the very least, you are paying a true living wage, not the ones that they made up, right? But the true living wage, right? That includes whatever. You cannot guarantee that there's not going to be child labor on that farm because the math doesn't work out.
Right. So I'm trying to make a different. I'm trying to make a different point, if I can.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So we have. I mean, you know, in this business, we know that there are lies, damn lies, and statistics, and you can pick any statistic you want to prove anything you want. Right. What I'm suggesting to people is that looking at something like this page, right? This page is designed the way it is, right, to make you feel impressed about things that that aren't necessarily impressive, right? It's designed to guide you around the page and to give you key tidbits of information. So you might walk away from this. Someone might walk away from this thinking that the most important thing is that this company claims now to be carbon neutral because they're buying carbon offsets, right? Whereas, what has that got to do with their claim of illegal child labor and child slavery? What you find, right, if you look closely, right down here, really, really, really tiny, is that of the 1,701 cases of illegal child labor that were found in the reporting period, 368 of them were quote unquote remediated, whatever that means, right?
I know what that means because I talked to Paul at Tony's on what that means because I asked him a few years ago. Yep. And so he gave me a different, it was a couple of years ago when I kicked him off the list, he gave me a different scenario they had in the press release. And they said they found on this one particular co-op, I think it was like 287 cases of illegal child labor, and they remediated 222 of them. I go, wow, that's wonderful. How did that happen? Tell me about that. And he said, we went to the parents and told them that it's illegal to keep your kids out of school. Okay.
Okay, so there was what we might call an intervention. But
There's intervention,
right. Yeah.
But
we don't know what the outcome of that intervention was.
Because they don't have the money to send them to school. That's why they're working on the farms, you know. Right. So that's what a really sad thing to say. We remediated stuff. The only way to remediate was to take that kid out of that farm, see that kid go to school, and pay that farmer enough so that they can hire a true adult laborer to harvest those beans. And their kids, when they get home from school, can start helping out for a few hours.
Right. The point that I want to make here, and which you've undergirded with your response here, is number one is we look at a number. We found 1,701 new cases. We remediated 368 of them. They're pointing out it's a 67% in year. We'd have to go back to another report to figure out if they reported about this the same way in the prior report to find out what 68% meant, right? But it still meant that there are over 1,300 cases that were not remediated. Right? So here's the point. It's not necessarily what we did do, it's what we didn't do. Right? And that's what I want to point out here on this page. Right? Your eye is guided around through bright colors, right, and graphics, which are designed to make pulling out the information very, very difficult. And they're designed to highlight information like big numbers, 8,921, 12,000, 3.79 million, 100%. They reached the 100 million revenue mark, right? This is what they want to point out to, not, oh my gosh, right? We only intervened in roughly 25% of all the cases that we found. Right. And so that's what I wanted to do by pointing out to everybody what's on this page.
Right.
You need to be really, really careful here in how you go about and look at it, because you might go look at this and go, oh my gosh, they're doing great things. But 8,921 farming families, 50,000 people out of, I mean, there's supposed to be 1.5 million children or 1.3 million in performing illegal labor. This is a drop in the bucket, people, right? If it's like, as I say about fair trade and rainforest alliance, if it was so good, everybody would be doing it, right? And so we need to understand why is it.
We're not seeing the dial go down. Nothing's turned the dial. Nothing's turned the dial down. That there's less kids. You know, these kids are. There's nothing coming out of these African things where the farmers going, wow, you know, since they started Rainforest Alliance, my kids are going to school now. No, that's not happening.
So I want to get to a couple of comments. Number one, again, whoever this LinkedIn user is, thanks for commenting again. So the influence Barry Callebaut line that Tony's has always used is the biggest piece of horseshit, right? The owner of Montezuma said exactly the same thing to me in a shop in my city a couple of years ago. So the caller's coming from the UK, which wish I'd filmed that on Plain Meaning. I was told by someone who was asked to approach Callebaut to do the same as Tony's. So there's another company who went to Callebaut and said, okay, what we'd like to do is we'd like to have an independently traceable cocoa supply chain, which we would deliver to your factory, and then you would manufacture the chocolate for us. So that's what who asked to do the same thing as Tony's, right? With traceable beans, right? And Callebaut allegedly said they would only do that for Tony's, no one else. I do not believe for an instance that they actually believe that.
Tony's is enough. Tony's is enough of a beard for them. They don't need to do that, right? They're still making money from Tony's, but I'm sure they're kind of a headache, you know, as far as it's just not a blind customer that's just buying their couverture and nobody knows, right? They have to think somebody from Barry Callebaut is on their board, blah, blah, blah. So I can see why they have Tony's. They don't need another one.
Well, so if what's going to happen is that, you know, there is not a dedicated production line in the facility at Visa where the manufacturing is done, right? So what Barry Callebaut has to do is has to shut down the line, clean it, make sure that everything's taken care of, run Tony's product, and shut it down.
It's the same. Why even go that far? I know with that charade, when they're writing Barry Callebaut a check every month for their services, when you look at these great bean to bar companies that aren't doing that, right? Mm-hmm. You know, they're doing everything themselves, soup to nuts, right? And we're supposed to take them and Tony's at the same level?
Well, and when Tony's wanted to set up their own factory in Zaandam in the waterfront in Amsterdam, the big thing they were touting is putting a roller coaster through it, right? So what does building a roller coaster have to do with improving the lives and livelihoods of farmers? No, it's all about providing an experience to their serious friends.
Right.
More than anything.
That they got, yeah.
Right. So it's interesting. So I want to also go. I'm going to jump here and go search for another graphic that Tony's has put together to share with everyone. And so we went from page 3, everybody, page 3 to 4 to page 130, right? And on page 130, we have this graphic that says this is the anatomy of a bar. Right. And, you know, there's this statistic that goes on in Big Chocolate that says only 3% of the retail price of a bar, it goes back to the farmer, is represented by the cost of cocoa. And what we find here is that the farm gate price that is being paid, they claim is 5.1% of the retail cost of the bar. Right. That's what their claim is. And that the fair trade premium is separate. The additional Tony's premium is separate. The cooperative and farmer support programs are different. The fair trade license fee is different. But what they're saying is that all of the things that we have in pink here are paid to the farmer or are projects that directly benefit the farmer. So I think which perpetuates one of the myths, if not outright bits of deceptive language that is propagated by fair trade, which is that all of this money is being paid, that all of the fair trade premium is being paid directly to the farmer, right? When in fact, a lot of the money goes to pay for the certification process and the overhead associated with managing the certification. So the notion that all of this is going directly to benefit for the farmer, ending up as cash in the pocket of the farmer, is pretty much laughable. Just, I think everybody should pay attention to that. But you have to go to page 130, right? And I want to know how many of the average serious Tony's chocolate friends made it to page 130 in the report. And I think this is part of the fundamental bit of deception that Tony's engages in producing this report, right? This is put this way together to make sure that we don't, it makes it really, really difficult. You have to be very, very dedicated in order to be able to find the numbers, right? And I don't know what I mean, you said you haven't done this for a couple of years, and I don't know. I mean,
I'll never get that time back.
Right, right. But again, so just a really quick notion. So, what I'm going is, for example, we saw that 3.79 million figure in terms of fair trade premiums, right, on the first graphic we were looking at. And so what we've got here is 4.863, and then 2 million is 2.6 million is the fair trade premium, and Tony's additional premium is another 2.1 million. I'm going, how do I get that 3.79 million, and how do I reconcile it with the 4.863 million?
I don't know. I know that they are paying, say, more than the regular farm gate price, but but unless you're paying a true living wage, there's still going to be abject poverty, child labor, chattel slavery in your thing. So I don't see anywhere in any of their discussion is that the one important thing we need to do is pay the farmers truly fairly, because there was a living wage thing that the industry dropped down by half this year. Okay, it was just all a bunch of BS, right? I don't see anything of that. All I see is from them, Nestle and everything, like all these initiatives because they care about children, but I never see them say, hey, we're going to have to pay these farmers a lot more. I hear excuses on why they aren't. Right, these middlemen, blah, 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 blah. But these, when it comes down to it, we're only talking a handful of multinational companies, and they have all the power over these governments. These governments will do what they say. So if they really were going to clean it up, they could.
And it just there, we could nitpick this to detail. Number one is, I think that the costs here in pink, which we see, I'm sorry, let me go and share.
Yeah, go back to the thing,
Yeah, I think that these costs up here in pink, right, should be related to these costs here in pink. So we should be able to figure them out. But notice that they have, one of the things that they don't include is there any illegal child labor involved in the production of, for example, the nuts that they put in their bars?
Oh, right. Yeah, the chocolate's just, exactly. The sugar. Hello, the sugar.
Right. So,
right. The palm oil or whatever,
Right. So so this is all about, one of the overarching themes that comes through on these live streams I've been doing is trying to help people become better, more skeptical consumers of the information that they've got. In the end, each one of us is going to determine what it is that it is important to us, right? And we're going to signal what we value, what we think of as quality, by spending our money in a particular way, right? And so, is Tony's a force for good in the world? Yes, to some extent, because what they've done is they've probably been the most effective individual company in terms of raising general awareness about the fact that illegal child labor and slavery do exist in the cocoa supply chain in the world, right? But that has to be balanced against the fact that it may lull some of their customers into a false sense of complacency. It may, in fact, be perpetuating a situation, right? And they're making it much more difficult to actually implement the kinds of systemic changes that are going to be necessary in order to make these, in order to be able to implement the kinds of changes that we are looking for. Are they, in fact, as much a part of the problem as they are a potential source to the solution? And that's the question I want everybody to think. And I think it's the question, if we were to go back to the intelligence squared debate about, is the Catholic Church a force for good in the world, which I recommend everybody go and take a watch of. is to get an idea about how this argument can be talked about from both sides. I mean, it is not a simple black and white issue. There are aspects of it which are incredibly easy to pull apart and go, this is wrong and this is right, right? But there are some really, really interesting questions there about, okay, for example, to what extent, I mean, even though Tony's Chocolonely's cacao supply chain might be independent of Barry Callebaut's, to what extent does that matter, right? If Tony's chocolate is being produced in a Barry Callebaut factory and Barry
Absolutely.
Callebaut
Yeah,
has its connections, right?
absolutely. It's all tied in. Yeah.
Right. And so, however you decide, and we haven't talked about does Tony's Chocolonely taste good? People go back up and down on either side of that equation. I mean, it's competently made for what it is. And here's an interesting statistic that I ran someplace else. Again, it turned out on r/chocolate on Reddit. Is somebody was complaining that a Tony's Chocolonely bar, the big 190 gram bar, was like way too expensive at €4 a bar. And what they really wanted to do is they wanted to buy 35-gram bars of Galaxy at £1 a piece. And what you do is you go, okay, you will say the Tony's bar is too expensive at €4 for 190 grams. But if you do the math at, one pound, right, per 35 grams, it ends up being significantly more expensive than Tony's, right? And so there's this misperception about all sorts of things related to the world of chocolate. And the one thing I wanted to do, and I don't know if you were aware of this, Anne, but I had someone contact me and who said that she was offered a job by Tony's in Amsterdam. So they used to have a store in the Westerpark, their big store. They now got the store in the Beurs van Berlage, which is where Chocoa is held. And they were offering what people in the UK will know as 0-hour contracts. Right. So,
okay. All right.
yes, and at like €12 an hour or something like so. So the idea of offering a 0-hour contract. So those in the UK will know is you're on contract to work for me, but we're not actually going to guarantee that we're going to give you any hours per week. Right. And we can change the schedule at any time. You could be booked for 8 hours in a week or 30 hours in a week, and we could say, no, we don't need you this week, and therefore you're not going to get employed. And so while they have this, and I understand why they do it, because they're not the employer. They have an intermediary company that is the employer.
Okay.
Right. So from a whole lot of labor issues don't accrue to their bottom line. They can externalize all these costs and all these risks and things like that. Whereas as an employer, they wouldn't be able to allow 0-hour contracts. All right. You'd have to be an independent contractor, which is what they can do in order to be able to do this. And I'm sort of wondered about just like the cognitive dissonance about being, really, really interested about illegal child labor in the cocoa farms in Africa, and yet not guaranteeing that the people who work for us in our store in Amsterdam are actually going to be taken care of, right, as employees.
Right.
I just think it's like, I want to thank the person who reached out to me and shared that information with me. It was just mind-boggling to me to read the terms of the employment contract and know what was going on.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, it's real crazy. So we're at the end of the hour. Where does the time go? And what I want to do is I want to do a real quick shift over to let everybody know this is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. You can go to this story here, and what you will do is you will find the link to the YouTube channel. I don't know why it takes so long for the preview to show up. There's the link to the archive, either on LinkedIn or on the Facebook, where you can go and watch the archive of this. Here is the link to the Intelligence Squared video. You can go watch that. Now, I also have links to articles that I've written about Tony's, as well as this one about Tony's deal with Ben and Jerry's and what it means in terms of greenwashing. So I don't know, Anne, how much you know about this, but the biggest investor in Tony's is a company called Verlinvest, which is a family-owned firm, who is also one of the largest shareholders in AB InBev, which is the largest beverage company in the world. My personal think is if we look at the deals that Tony's has done with Ben and Jerry's and with other companies like Adidas is one, is that they're looking either to go public or to sell. Right? They just announced $30 million in new investment, which doesn't seem like a lot of money for a company their size. And they've also indicated they have this new program called Mission Lock, which is designed to make it more difficult for new owners to be able to change the mission of the company, even though they're a B Corp, and you can write into your charter that you don't have to consider profits as your number one goal, that there are other things that you can base decisions on. The Mission Lock idea is designed to make sure that we can consider other things and make it more difficult for people to change the mission of the company. And one of the reasons why I think that's important is that it seems like a signal that they're getting ready for a change of ownership, whether it's through a public offering or it's for somebody to buy them out. Don't know the answer to that question, but it's an interesting thing. One of the things I noticed, Anne, is that I don't have a link to Be Slavery Free in here, slavery chocolate. So I put that.
A lot of you people already know me and everything.
Right, but I will put a link to slaverychocolate.org in here.
Okay.
For anybody who just wants to look, the page that we've been examining I embedded it as a screenshot into here. And if anybody wants to download the annual report, there's a link here, and you can download the annual report and take a look at it yourself. And with that, I wanted to say thank you, everybody who's watched through to the end. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here on World Chocolate Day. One of the things you might want to do is when you get done with this, go into the comments and let us know what you plan to do on World Chocolate Day, how you plan to celebrate the day. I noticed that most people were celebrating it without talking about some of the larger social issues. I think there's an opportunity to do that. I want to thank Catherine Laverack for her comments and the other people who commented here at doing that. Catherine says important to focus on these types of issues on World Chocolate Day. I'm going to thank the members of TheChocolateLife.com. They are the sponsors of every episode of The Chocolate Life Live. If you're not a member, please go like, subscribe, thumbs down, all the kinds of things that you can to help spread the word. And Anne, any last minute words you want to give for today?
I want to thank everybody, because I know I'm like a negative Nancy about this, because I am, okay, but chasing around these multinationals and everything like that. But I want to thank from the bottom of my heart that the people who are smart about this issue, who are behaving ethically about this issue, the chocolatiers that are making less money because they're not compromising on their ethics. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. This is going to be I don't know how to call it, the gestalt or whatever that's going to help the situation. You guys are so important, because the force for good hopefully will start to rise up. So thank you so much for everybody who's doing the right thing. I hope all of our ideas and everything will get implemented. And just my last thing is, but we need those multinationals to buck up. However that's done. Any ideas? Let's let me know.
Well, I think my response to that is we can't abdicate our responsibility.
No. Yes.
To these companies to do the work for us.
No.
Right. As much as we would like there to be a seal for this and some sort of way to guarantee the things that we can trust everything that's told us, there is no alternative. But really, to look at things skeptically, to understand exactly what it is that's going on in order to be able to form your opinions. And wherever those opinions lie, I'm not here to judge one way or another about the chocolate that you like, the brands you do purchase. I've learned that it's almost impossible to live a Cargill-free life, for example. I mean, just
it is. Yeah.
If you look at the brands that are associated with this, I'll put another link. I did a post a little while ago called the Wicked List, the Wicked Good and the Wicked Bad List. And one of the things I did is I said, okay, if you want to not deal with Mondelez, here are all these brands right,
Oh,
that you can't purchase from, or if you don't want to deal with Nestle, and like, oh my gosh, there are all these brands that you didn't know, were owned by Nestle, and it's like, and many of them are beauty brands, and so it's a very, very interesting. The point being is we need to come to, I believe, our own considered opinions, our own informed opinions, and we can only do that if we do the research and balance, right, what it is that is most important to us when we go into the store, or online and purchase whatever it is we're purchasing. And we're here today on World Chocolate Day, so we're talking about purchasing chocolate. With respect to today's proposition, is Tony's Chocolonely a force for good in the world? We've come across and say, yes, there are some things that Tony's does that appear to be a force for good in the world, but right, there are some things that we need to hold them to be much more accountable in terms of making sure that they deliver on the promises that they're making to consumers. And with that, I want to say, everybody, thank you very much for joining us here on World Chocolate Day, and remind everyone, as I do at the end of every episode, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you are doing it wrong.